can't believe I read 110 books in 5 months. So my intention is to actually obviously go as quickly through the books as possible, kind of sum it up in maybe a couple of sentences if I can.
Yeah, I totally didn't do this. So I've split the video into 2 parts. This is part 1.
So anyway, let's just start, shall we? First book was The Man I Can't Forget by Eva Woods. So this book starts off with Eve. She has a very unusual memory in that she literally cannot forget anything, and obviously whilst some people would see that as a bonus, she has some things in her past that she would rather forget. She currently works in a care home, and one day the police bring along a man they found walking along the road, and they have named him Adam, but they don't actually know his name, and they kind of ask this care home to look after them due to the fact he can't remember anything. He can't remember his name, he can't remember where he lives, no one's come forward to claim him, no one's reported any accidents, no one's reported him missing. So as Eve is pretty good at getting other residents to remember things because she's got a good memory, she knows how to kind of tweak it out of the residents, she starts to help Adam, and that's basically the premise of the story. However, there is also another character called Rachel who comes into the story quite early on, and she's trying to hide something of her own. So I liked the book, I thought it was a nice sweet story, and I liked the characters, and yeah, I gave it 3 stars. So the next book is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. Camille goes back to her hometown. She's kind of like a junior investigative newspaper reporter, and they have asked her to go back because there are some missing girls within her hometown. So they think she might be able to get a bit more information from the town's residents because she used to live there. Now, there are definitely trigger warnings for this book, so please look them up. It is quite a dark book. If you know Gillian Flynn, she wrote Gone Girl, amongst others. And I always find I feel a bit dark. That sounds bad. I always feel dark myself after reading them. It kind of brings me down a bit, if that makes sense. This isn't what I would say my typical kind of book, although I really did like Gone Girl. It kind of made me feel a bit dark. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't a pleasant book for me to read, is what I'm going to say. Anyway, I did give it 3 stars. It was definitely an interesting book, but like I said, please do check out the trigger warnings. The Last Time We Met by Emily Houghton, I hope that's correct. Basically, it's Eleanor and Finn. They used to be best friends when they were youngsters, and they said at the time, if we don't get to, I think it's 30, 35, we'll get married. If we're still single, both of us are still single by that point. They haven't spoken in 15 years. Family illness brings them back together, and they obviously kind of try to re-establish their friendship, essentially. For me, when I was reading this, it was odd because I was like, it's kind of got everything that you'd want in a romance, but it just didn't really connect with me. I didn't particularly like any of the characters. Eleanor was better than Finn. I keep forgetting his name. Eleanor was more interesting than Finn, but yeah, I just didn't really connect with the characters, in particular Finn. So I gave it 2.5 stars. I wasn't overly blown away by this book at all. So the next book is Magpie by Elizabeth Day, and this is the first book of Elizabeth's, I think, that I've read, and I found this book really interesting actually. Marissa and her boyfriend have decided to move in together. Marissa is pregnant with their first child, and it turns out that they find this lovely house, but to move in there they have to get a lodger in. The lodger is a woman, so the woman starts doing odd things that just kind of get Marissa's back up, and that's essentially where the story starts. This one is tricky for me because I really enjoyed it around the first half of the book, but after the halfway point the whole theme of the book changes, and it gets a bit more boring, I'll be perfectly honest. But because the first half was so thrilling, I still really did like this book. I gave it 3 stars, and I would definitely read some of Elizabeth's books in the future, and I have actually read one more of hers a bit later in the video. So the next one, I don't know if you can hazard a guess why I picked this up. It's because it's called Cat Lady. Come on, let's be fair. I have to show you this picture. Look at this gorgeous kitty. Anyway, so, sorry, Cat Lady, Dorno Porter. So the story starts, Mia is married and they have a lovely cat called Pigeon, which I love that name for a cat. What a brilliant name for a cat, Pigeon. And essentially there are ups and downs within Mia's life, and she has like 2 major life changes that happen to her. And it's kind of the fallout of that. And the thing that struck me the most about this book was the absolute lovely relationship between Mia and Pigeon. It was lovely, and the backstory on how they came to be together is lovely. I would say if you get upset about pets, you might get upset within this book. I won't say any more. I did actually enjoy this book. It was a bit too spicy for me in parts. It was kind of graphic in some of its descriptions. So I wasn't overly keen on that. But I did give it 3 stars, and that is mainly from the relationship between Mia and Pigeon. So the next one is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. I picked this up mainly because I had seen other booktubers say it's a really good book. Essentially what happens is, I think her name's Cadence. Her family, the Sinclair family, are kind of the rich family, the perfect family. There's something like 3 sisters with their respective families, the kids and the grandpa, etc. So they, every summer, go to their own little island, which I think's off Manhattan, or somewhere like that, and they summer there. They spend the whole summer there. Cadence has had an accident, it appears. So basically this is the first year after she's had her accident, and she's trying to find out a bit more information about what happened. There were points of this book I was kind of just waiting for something else to happen. The pacing was a bit slow, but however, I have to say the ending, wow. Just, I did not see coming at all. Again, there are parts you might find upsetting. Yeah, just be aware of that. But the ending for this book really made it for me. I gave it a 3.75 stars, and I do know there's a prequel which I might be interested to pick up. I'm not sure, I haven't picked it up yet. But I did really like this book. So the next one is The Break by Marion Keyes. Basically, Amy's husband, Hugh, decides he wants a break from life, from their relationship. Bearing in mind they're married. Kind of discusses it with her, but says, I'm going. So he's leaving behind her, and I think it's her daughters, and he's going away. He's basically ignoring the fact he's in a relationship, that he's married, and has said he'll come back in like a year, I think it is, and I think the plan is they'll see where they're at that point. So yeah, that's basically what the book is. Amy is carrying on. You don't really hear much from Hugh's side, but obviously he's off doing whatever he wants to do, and then it's what happens throughout the time that Amy's been left, essentially. I did find there was a lot of characters that I didn't necessarily think we needed all those characters. It's obviously quite a chunky book. It did take me quite a long time. I think I listened to it on audio. Basically, I think they could have cut the book down a little bit, and it would have made the pacing a bit better, is what I'm trying to say. I did like the book. It's not one of my favourites of Marion's, but I did find it an interesting concept, definitely, to have a break from life and your marriage, essentially. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, so the next one is The Highly Sensitive Person by Elaine N. Aron, PhD. This is, well, it's a self-help book, I guess you'd call it. I kind of saw it and was like, okay, well, I think I have aspects in my personality. You could call me a highly sensitive person, and I was interested to read it. It's a lot of what's the word? I found the book was quite condescending. I found it very boring. And I swear to whoever, the amount of times, this is another one I listened to on audio, the word arousal was said so many times it felt like it was said every other word. I would not recommend this book. Okay, the next one is The Wake Up Call by Beth O'Leary. So this is about Izzy and Lucas. They both work as hotel receptionists at a hotel. The hotel is going through a bit of financial issues, and it's essentially trying to keep the hotel afloat, but there's kind of like a rivalry between Izzy and Lucas. I found the characters, in particular Izzy, were quite petty, and it did feel quite contrived to me, as in you're just trying to make obstacles before they get together. It didn't feel that real to me. I do like Beth O'Leary's writing, but I think this is probably the worst one I've read of hers personally. I didn't really connect with the characters as much. I gave it 3 stars. Okay, the next one, Matthew Perry, Friends, Lovers and the Big Terrible Thing. I had bought this when he was still with us, and it was one of the books I kept putting off, not because I didn't want to read it, but because I really wanted to read it. So I wanted to I wanted to clear some of my bookshelf off before, so I could keep this book, essentially. Then obviously he passed away, which is very sad. And it does put a very different perspective, I imagine, reading it now he's not with us. Matthew was Chandler was my favourite character within Friends, although I love them all, obviously. And this is his story. If you know anything about Matthew's life, he was an addict and he struggled with alcohol and substances. And that is a lot of the book, I'll be perfectly honest. Yes, there are other elements. He had times in his life where he felt abandoned, particularly by his parents. That's quite upsetting to read about. Don't like saying this. It does come across as he's quite bitter, and I'm not saying he doesn't have a right to be, but it's within the writing it is quite evident that is still how he feels when he wrote the book. I will keep this book. It's got some lovely photos of Matthew and, you know, other people, important people in his life. I gave it a 3 stars, but I'll just show you if I can find them quickly. Some lovely photos that he's got within the book. Yeah, so I will be keeping this book. Yeah, I would have kept this book anyway, but now it kind of feels a bit more important. Don't know why I'm getting upset. Anyway. Page 2, 5 years from now. Nell and Van, and I was listening to this on audio, I think, and they kind of switch his name, because I think it's Vian, but I'm going to call him Nell and Van because that is one of the names he's called. It was a bit confusing. They basically met when their parents were dating and moved in together. Something happens and Van has to move away, essentially, but around every 5 years or so they meet up, you know, not through chance encounters, but because they're still reasonably close. At some point, as you can imagine, romantic feelings get involved. I gave it 3 stars. I like Page 2's writing. I wasn't 100% behind their relationship because it felt a bit odd to me, because they were, although they weren't related, it felt like because they'd met at such a young age and lived together for a while, it felt a bit kind of incestuous to me. I know technically they weren't, but it kind of, I couldn't shake that feeling. So for me it was kind of like, couldn't quite get behind that for me. So the next book I read was The Mystery Guest, which is part of the Maid series by Nita Prose. And if you've seen any of my reviews that technically I read after this one, I really like Molly the Maid series. And this was the second book in the series. So basically what happens in the Grand Regency Hotel where Molly the maid works, a mystery writer has come for, you know, a big publicity, public event, and he keels over and dies. So they're trying to find out whether it was murder, an accident, a natural occurrence, and that's the story essentially. I really like Molly as a character, and this didn't disappoint. I think I rated it a 4 stars and would recommend you read it if you've read, obviously this is the second one in the series, so I'd recommend Molly the Maid the series in general. I like it. So the next one I read was Us by David Nichols. Douglas's wife has said to him she's not sure whether she wants to carry on the relationship, hence she might want a divorce. So instead of saying okay, Douglas decides to take his family, his wife, his son on this adventure, basically, this holiday, going to the places that they always wanted to go to try and convince her not to leave him, essentially. I was actually really surprised. I really liked this book. It sounds like an interesting concept, which it is. I really liked the writing, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Okay, Don't Tell the Groom by Anna Bell. I've read a couple of books from Anna. I like the premise of this story. Penny and her partner Mark. Penny has been dreaming of getting married to Mark. Well, getting married, but obviously to Mark. And he finally pops the question. The problem is they've been saving together in like a marriage fund, and she realises when she goes to pay for something, order something, she's actually spent most of the money online gambling. So possible trigger warnings, I guess, if that might affect you. So essentially what she does is, you know, Don't Tell the Bride, where the groom has to arrange everything and sort of does it behind the bride's back without telling her. She decides to do this, but to him. She makes it like a little game, as in, oh no, I'll arrange everything, you don't have to worry about it, and you'll see what I've done. I thought it was really funny, the whole concept of the book. I did like the book, and I gave it a 3.5 stars. To Kill a Mockingbird. Right, this is the first one I've recently done a review on. That and the next one, which is Go Set a Watchman, both by Harper Lee. This first one is obviously quite a famous classic book. Scout and Jem are the main protagonists. They're young kids, essentially. Scout is a young girl, about 6 years old. Jem is her brother. It's kind of a coming of age story, as in they grow up and they do their kiddie games, etc. But Atticus Finch, which I'm sure you must have heard the name, I certainly had, even though I hadn't read it before now. Atticus Finch is the defendant of Tom Robinson, who is a black man who has been accused of assault of a white woman. And it goes into the trial and obviously the aftermath of that. And it's very much the society's feelings on racism. This book has obviously a lot of racism in it, because it's set back in the 1930s. It's also set in the Deep South as well. A lot of racist talk within it, so if it bothers you, just be aware that's within that. It's classic for a reason, but for me, I'm not what I would call a big classics reader. I did like it, and there was definitely some elephants, I was gonna say. There were definitely some elements of the story that I really did like, and I am glad I read it. But for me, it's a 3.5, as in I kind of expected a bit more, that I'd be more blown away. I did like it, but yeah, I expected a bit more, I guess. And then the follow-on, Go Set a Watchman, again in my video, which I've linked. Go Set a Watchman by Harper Lee. This is Scout, the female protagonist in To Kill a Mockingbird, I should say. When this is Scout when she's 26 now. She's moved out, she's working in New York, and she's come back. Atticus is struggling a little bit, he's got a bit older. Again, I won't go too into it, but I I was bored with this one. I didn't feel like there was much of a story apart from society's views on colours, as in white people, black people, what they should and shouldn't be doing. I didn't feel like this book was needed after To Kill a Mockingbird, to be honest. I rated it 2 stars. I wasn't impressed, to be honest. Grown-ups, Marian Keyes. Essentially, this is about a big, glamorous Irish family that perhaps aren't so glamorous. It starts off with the premise that Cara, one of the family, one of the wives of one of the brothers, has bumped her head and she starts telling the truth. I think that's actually quite misleading, because although yes, that happens, that's not kind of the big thing in the story. It's kind of just about this family, and I found it relatively boring. I didn't connect with the story, I wasn't bothered by the story, I wasn't interested in the story. I gave it 2 stars. It was probably one of the worst ones I've read by Marian, and I've read most of her stories, and usually I like them. I didn't connect with this one at all. How to Fail by Elizabeth Day. Obviously Elizabeth wrote Magpie. I guess you would classify it as a self-help book, but it's kind of a book just telling you, you know, it's okay to fail sometimes. Sometimes failure actually leads to better things. And that's essentially what the book is. I actually really enjoyed it. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it. And Elizabeth comes across as someone you'd really like as a friend, and it really comes across within the writing. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4.2 stars. So the next book that I listened to, because I think it was on Amazon Original Stories on audio, was Murder at the Royal Ruby by Nita Prose, who wrote the Maid series. Essentially the story is of Grace, who's kind of like an understudy within their theatre group, and she wants to become a full-time actress. She has to kind of get the okay from a few of the upper members, and there's just one that she can't get to say yes yet. Problem is, this person is then murdered. So it's kind of like, what happened? I really enjoyed it, and it was a very short story. It wasn't that long, but it grabbed you right from the start. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 4. The next book I listened to was The Upside of Falling Down. I can't remember who it was by, so I'll put it on the screen. Apologies. This was about Clementine Haas, I think her name is. She is the sole survivor of a plane crash. She has ended up in an Irish hospital. She decides she doesn't want to go back to her main life and befriends a man called Kieran, and asks to hang out with him, I guess, for a couple of weeks before she goes back to her own life. But she's a bit secretive and she doesn't tell him exactly what happened. I really liked the idea of the book, as in the sole survivor of a plane crash, etc. But the book was not my cup of tea at all in any way. For example, this is what really put me off the book to start off with. When she's in the hospital, there is a male nurse who looks at her and brings her a bra, the exact size she is, just by looking at her. To me, I was like, that's a bit gross. He offers her a choice of a book or something and decides she's definitely not gay because she chose a heterosexual book or something. It's just stuff like that. I was just like, it was so icky to me, and I almost DNF'd it due to that. It didn't get much better. The book wasn't that interesting after that, and I was quite disappointed because it was such a strong premise to the story. Yeah, I was quite disappointed, and it's actually put me off reading any of... her name's Rebecca Crane, I remember now. It's actually put me off reading any other books that I've seen of Rebecca's, because I just thought, if that's how she writes, that's not my kind of book. Okay, so then the next books I read were the Natural series, and I'll go through them very quickly, but this is again one that I've done a review on, so I'll put a card here if you want to go there after this video, obviously. So the Natural series is mainly about Cassie, who has natural abilities, and she's headhunted by the FBI because of her natural abilities. She's a bit of a profiler, and she reads people very easy, their character and their thoughts, etc. There are other naturals within the FBI program that she's been accepted into, I should say. So there's like a human lie detector, so she can tell if someone's lying to her. There's also someone who's very good with maths and statistics, and so on. They are brought in to do cold cases. However, there is a current case that they are actually drawn into, and also one of the reasons that Cassie took the role in the FBI is she's got a cold case that she wants to find out further information herself. So that's the first one, the naturals, 5 stars from me. The next one is Killer Instinct, which mainly focuses on Dean and a relative of his who is actually a serial killer, and he's in prison. I, again, really liked this book. I certainly did not see some of the twists come in, that's for sure. Gave it 5 stars. The next one is All In. This one centred around Las Vegas and casinos there, and it was very much focused on Sloane and her abilities of maths and statistics. I wasn't as interested in this book. I found it a bit overly complicated with all the mathematical terms, and I zoned out a bit, to be honest. I still gave it 4 stars because I still really liked the characters and their abilities, etc. Just the storyline for me was a bit more boring. So the last full book, I should say, because there's a novella. So the last book was called Bad Blood, which is basically a wrap-up of the unanswered questions, including Cassie's cold case, and it kind of ties everything together. This was the worst book of the lot for me. I found it was very far-fetched. It was a bit trying too hard to be really interesting, but to me it just felt like, well, that's over the top ridiculous. I didn't like it. I know a lot of people think it's great, but to me personally, I just thought it was a bit silly, to be honest. Again, still really liked the characters. The writing is brilliant throughout the series. Really enjoy the writing. But for this story, I had to give it a 3.5. After which, there was a novella called 12, which goes back to the really good basics of the natural series for me. It focuses more on their abilities. It was a very simple story, but in a good way. And yeah, I really enjoyed the novella, so I gave the novella a 5. Overall, I gave the series 5 stars. So the next book is The List by Siobhan Vivian. I was bought this book. I didn't buy it myself. I'm not sure I would have bought it for myself. But basically every year in this particular school, throughout all the school years, one girl is chosen as the prettiest and one girl is chosen as the ugliest, and it's put on a list for everyone to see in the school. And it's kind of like the fallout of that for this most recent one. I thought it was quite an interesting idea to the book, but this was very much more on the immature side. You know, like the 13 Reasons Why, yes, that's a high school book, but obviously it has kind of darker themes, etc. So it's more aimed at adults as opposed to necessarily young adults. This is what I would say is probably classed as young adults because of the way it's written. However, that's not to say there are some elements within the book that are possible trigger warnings, so if you think that you might be affected by something, you might want to check that out. I wasn't blown away by it, but it did seem to get better in the later chapters. I gave it a 3 stars. Okay, so The Secret Bridesmaid by Katie Burchill. Essentially, Sophie has a business where she pretends to be the bridesmaid of the bride, but essentially she's kind of like a wedding planner. I liked the concept of the story. It was quite funny. I gave it a 3.5 stars. Atomic Habits by James Clear. I wanted to read this for ages, but I wanted to clear some space off my bookshelf first. Spoiler alert, I did not. I just bought more books. So I just decided I wanted to read it anyway. Basically, it's an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. What more can I say to that? I really enjoyed the book. I can understand why so many 5-star reviews. I gave it a 4.5. I did find it a little bit repetitive, but I can understand why you need to kind of hammer the point home. I actually really enjoyed it. I would like to keep this book. I think I would like to read it again because I actually listened to it on Audible and I really enjoyed it on Audible as well, but I'd like to keep it so I can read it again possibly at some point. How to End a Love Story by Yulin Kwang. I probably pronounced that wrong. I apologise. This is about Helen, she's written a book. The rights have been bought and they're going to make it into a TV series. And Grant, who is kind of like the script writer, he's trying to obviously write the script for the TV series. They've got to work together. The problem is they've got a bit of a past and it's not a happy one. For me, there was too much spicy scenes written very graphically, including self-love, let's say. I didn't need that. It kind of felt like it was written by a man. More kind of titillation than romance, I guess, and I'm more of a romance kind of scenes person. Let's put it like that. I did like the book overall, but there were parts that weren't for me. Let's put it like that. I still gave it a 3.5, and I did enjoy the book, just there were some bits that weren't quite for me. Her Last Summer by Emily Freud. Basically, what happened is Mari vanished 20 years ago. Cassidy is kind of a television reporter, so she's trying to find out what happened to Mari, and for the first time ever, Mari's boyfriend Luke, who was with her at the time when she disappeared, has said he wants to put his view across because everyone has accused him basically of killing her without evidence. So that's basically the start of the story. It starts off a little bit slowly, but I don't mean that in a bad way, more in a setting the scene kind of way, and it ramps up obviously as you go throughout the story. I actually did really enjoy this one. It's a little bit far-fetched, but not so much to the point you're like, that's absolutely ridiculous. I gave it a 4 stars and I'd be happy to read another of Emily's books. The Sunshine Sisters by Jane Green. Now, Jane Green wrote Jemima J, which is one of my all-time favourite books. I haven't read it in years, but I definitely still have it. And at some point I will probably read it again just out of nostalgia. But basically this is about Ronnie, who's the mother. I think she's got 3 daughters, and Ronnie's not very well. Essentially, she wants the daughters to be closer because they're a bit estranged, nothing major, you know, different personalities, etc. But she wants them to kind of come together but before she passes away, essentially. I didn't really enjoy this book. I didn't really care about the other characters. The shame of this story is if it had been more from Ronnie's point of view, as in when she was younger. She's very narcissistic, she's very me, and everything's about her, and she was famous, she still wants the fame and the adoration and stuff like that. That would have been much more interesting to me than the lives of her daughters, unfortunately. I gave it a 2.5 star. Another Time, Another Place by Jo Lovett. Liv and Ben find themselves locked together in, not a shed, but let's say a kind of a food shed that's in town, essentially. They get on really well, there's definitely a spark there, but it's just the timing's not right. Liv is moving to Paris. They have these chance encounters where they obviously meet up with each other again through natural circumstances and so forth. So there's quite a few of those. One of the things I didn't particularly like about this book was some of the decisions that Ben made. I just don't agree with some of the things he decided by himself. But I did enjoy it. I gave it a 3.75. The Last Letter from Your Lover by Jojo Moyes. There's going to be quite a lot of Jojo Moyes in this review. Basically it starts off with Ellie. She is kind of a modern day woman. She's having an affair with a married man. And within her job she's a writer, like a journalist writer. And she's been tasked with going into the archives to look out kind of women's style and what they were into back in the old days. I think it's meant to be the 60s. However, she finds a letter, and the letter, I'll just read it because it's on the back of the book. I'll be at platform 4 Paddington at 7:15 on Friday evening, and there is nothing in the world that would make me happier than if you found the courage to come with me. Know that you hold my heart and my hopes in your hands. Yours, B. And she's fascinated by this, and she wants to find out whether they kind of got together, what the letter's about, and that is kind of the start of the story. I liked this more than I thought I would, I'll be perfectly honest, and I gave it a 3.75. This was a charity book find years ago, and it's been on my shelf for ages, and I kind of, before I decided I was going to do the YouTube thing, I was like, well, I'll clear all the ones I don't think that people will be overly invested in because they're a bit older. This was one of them. I'm Celibate, Get Me Out of Here, The Memoirs of an Internet Dater by Joe Elliott. And I actually really enjoyed it. I'm a sucker for a dating story because obviously you get all the mad characters that are unfortunately realistic. So Jo is 30, she's looking for love. This is back when kind of, I think, internet dating was relatively new, and it's now so weird as folk. Basically, I gave it a 3.5 stars, I actually enjoyed it. The Cast by Danielle Steele. I did not buy this book, I was bought this book. It's not my type of book normally. I wouldn't pick it up myself. It's about Kate Whittier, who, again, is, I think she writes articles for a newspaper, and a very renowned, well-loved article, and she then writes a book, and then she meets a television producer who would like to make it into a TV series. So then Kate is then kind of brought in as the writer stroke consultant of the TV series, and that's where it starts. Yeah, these type of books aren't for me. I felt like there wasn't much of a story. It's essentially what I've just told you with characters thrown in. There's a lot of mentions of people who are not relevant to the story, so you don't care about them. And yeah, it wasn't for me, basically. I gave it a 2 stars. Toxic by Jackie Rose. I would not pick this book up. This is not my cup of tea. Someone bought it for me. And it's kind of like London Gangsters. I would not choose to read that personally. Anyway, but this is about Cockney gangsters. Bree is a wife and she's trying to escape her husband, and a lot of the focus is on her trying to escape in some shape or form, but also the other London gangsters within it. There's obviously some nasty scenes, just in case that might bother you. I didn't enjoy this book at all. I will not ever pick up another book like this. This is not my type of book. I gave it a 1.5. I should have DNF'd it. Okay, next one. Me and Mr. Jones by Lucy Diamond. 3 Charming Brothers, which would you choose? Essentially, this is about the older parents who want to retire. They've got a summer holiday home that they kind of, I guess it's like a B&B. So they obviously welcome holidayers in, but they've got to the point they feel like they're a bit too old to do it. They've got 3 sons and their family, the son's family, and they're trying to decide who should take over the family business, essentially. So you've got the lives of the different sons and their families, and the parents. So that's essentially the book. I gave it 3 stars. It was quite a nice story. There were darker sides. Again, sometimes these books surprise you, and I would say there's definitely trigger warnings for, let's say, toxic relationships. So, but yeah, I did enjoy it. Look at Me Now by Simone Goodman. So Gracie is the star of a television cookery show, and it's kind of on its last legs. There's talk of it being shut down. It's not getting the views. She manages to get a new cookery show, but it's more of a steamy cookery show. And also her romantic life isn't going very well because her boyfriend, I think, leaves her. That's the start of this book. I wasn't overly keen on this book, to be perfectly honest. Didn't like some of the decisions that Gracie made. Yeah, I found it quite slapstick in the writing, as in like trying to be funny, but it just didn't quite pull it off for me. I gave it 2 stars. Right, I've got to the point I'm going to have to take the books off the shelf. So. Okay, so the first one, The Castaways by Lucy Clarke. I liked the concept of this story, which is you have the past and present, one from a sister in the then, so in the past, and one from the sister in the now. One of the sisters gets on a plane, the other one doesn't, and the plane is in a crash. I really liked the idea of this book, and I also liked the fact there were past and present timelines, because you weren't sure, you know, whether the sister survived, what happened, because the sister's now in the present, and so forth. I actually really enjoyed this book. I thought it was very interesting. The only thing I would say is I wasn't 100% sold on the final part of the book, as in the ending, but other than that I did really enjoy it and I liked the writing. Would definitely read another of Lucy's books again. I gave it a 4.25 stars. The Girl Next Door by Elizabeth Noble. Essentially this book is about all the different families stroke people that reside in an apartment block in New York. I'll show you. In the list of characters, you see, I think I counted, there's something like 35 characters. Now obviously not all of them you follow exactly, but you know, some of them are kids and so forth, but that's too many characters for me. I much prefer a book when it focuses on either one person or a few people and go into depth, as opposed to a lot of characters and quite shallow, because you don't really get to know them. For me, that's not my type of book. All the men in it as well were quite horrible characters. I didn't like any of them, I don't think, from memory. I gave it 2.5 stars. The Reading List by Sarah Nisha Adams. I had read really good reviews about this book, so I was looking forward to reading it. Basically, Mukesh has recently lost his wife and he feels a bit disconnected from her. He's missing her. So she was a big reader. He goes to a library and kind of doesn't know what he's looking for. He says to Elisa, who's the librarian there, I don't know what to read. She found a list of book recommendations from, she doesn't know from who, but she found a list. So she starts reading the books and then recommending them to Mukesh. I like the idea of the book. The problem is, I kind of feel like the writing wasn't 100% there for me personally, and I do feel it relied a lot on the books within the book. For example, To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch is mentioned a lot. I've Got the Courage of Atticus Finch, and so on. I found that really cheesy and a bit cringy, I'll be honest. It did have some good parts to it, but there were also possible trigger warnings as well. I think most books you could say there are, to be fair. I gave it 2.5. Sunset by Jessie Cave. Picked this up in a charity shop. Now Jessie Cave is a celebrity, I guess. I've seen her on panel shows and on TV programmes and so on. And I'll be honest, usually when someone is famous, I stay clear of their books as a general rule, because I find they're not very good. This is about Ruth and Hannah. They are sisters. They are very different to each other. Ruth is kind of aimless and she doesn't really have a plan. She's kind of floats along, and Hannah's very much organised. She's well-driven sister, I guess. They go on holiday every year together as sisters, but this time something bad happens. All I can say is, please pick this book up. It is surprisingly amazing. There's very much trigger warnings. in regards to grief and, you know, topics like that, and the coping of the aftermath of getting emotional. This book made me emotional. I also listened to this on Audible, and it's read by the author's sibling. And if you get the audiobook, there's a bit of extra information that leads to why this book possibly was in Jessie's mind. I feel like the audiobook really made this book for me, but also I will be keeping the book because I do feel like I will want to read this again. I gave this a 5-star. I was so surprised how good this book was. I would really recommend you pick this up. These were, I bought these years ago, sat on my bookshelf, always as kind of, oh, I'll be interested to read them at some point. I used to know that Stuff You Forgot from School from Caroline Taggart. Spoiler alert, I did not rate these because it's just kind of information, and it's stuff, quite frankly, I'm not sure I ever knew some of the stuff, but I just kind of wanted to clear it off my bookshelf. Yeah, so it's just stuff that you probably learnt in school, essentially. Same for the next one, My Grammar and I, or Should That Be Me? Caroline Taggart and J.A. Wines. Again, did not rate this. It's just information. I feel like I can't rate information books because it's not even someone's theory. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just information basically about grammar. Okay, the next one, another Jojo Moynes, Silver Bay. This is about, there's a family business of like a B&B, but they also take like the residents whale spotting, stroke dolphin spotting, etc. Liza is trying to escape something from her past, and she's got a very big secret until Mike Dormer comes about and things start to change. This wasn't my favourite of JoJo's, I'll be perfectly honest. It felt to me like very slow paced, and I just wasn't that into the characters, and I wasn't into the possible romance or anything like that. And also the secret that Liza had is, I couldn't believe something she did in it. So yeah, I gave it a 3. Wasn't my favourite. Grace After Henry, and I have no idea how to say this name, so I apologise to the author. Ithen Shortall. Essentially, Grace. There's so many Graces in this pile. The protagonist names. Grace, her boyfriend Henry, unfortunately passed away, and she, as you do, she keeps kind of seeing him everywhere. One day her boiler breaks down, and the person who comes to fix it is essentially his carbon copy, and that is the prelude, the start of this book. So obviously trigger warnings, because there is mention of death, and she is coping after Henry has passed away. I liked the way it was written, her grief. That sounds bad, doesn't it? But it was written very well. You did feel the grief as well, and I'm starting to... so emotional. Anyway, really enjoyed this book. It was a very interesting idea for a book. Again, I thought they dealt with the grief really well. There were other parts of the story as well. I actually gave it a 4.75, and I would definitely pick up another of the author's books if I see them. Katie Carter Wants a Hero by Ruth Saberton. Spoiler alert, I've read this before and I liked it, but I thought I'll read it again and then I can always unhaul it, which was my plan. Basically, Katie Carter is a teacher, but she wants to be a writer, and she writes these steamy bunkbusters, and that's essentially what she wants to do with her life. She has a long-term boyfriend, and that kind of falls apart after she does a disastrous meal for her partner's boss, and that's kind of the start of the story. If you've read the book, the lobster is quite a huge part of the story in a good way. I thought it was really funny. This is your classic, can't take it seriously book. Quite funny. Yeah, it's not a serious book at all. I really enjoyed it. And I gave it a 3.5. The Woman Who Stole My Life, Marion Keyes. Stella, who's the main protagonist in this book, meets a man. They have a bit of a car accident, everyone's fine. So they swap numbers. She thinks he's really arrogant, blah blah. She meets up with him due to illness. She's not very well, and she kind of bumps into him, and that is essentially where the story really starts. Obviously, trigger warning for illnesses, if that might affect you. There were definitely parts of this book I actually really enjoyed, and it was mainly about her illness. That sounds bad, doesn't it? The interesting side of this for me was when they were kind of focused on her illness. It was quite scary to read about. Again, not my favourite Marion Keyes book, but I did enjoy reading this one. Gave it a 3.5. Then I read We Were on a Break by Joe Lovett. Essentially what happens is Callum's flight is cancelled, and his friend says, oh, I know another friend who's actually in Europe and is travelling in this camper van. You might be able to get a lift off her. They arrange that, and it turns out that she is his ex-girlfriend, essentially, so it's a bit awkward. I really liked this book. I thought it was a very interesting idea. I couldn't 100% get behind the relationship, and it is, again, because Joe wrote one of the other books, I couldn't get behind some of the things the man did. Basically, some of the things he did in the past, I wouldn't be able to get over to have a relationship with the person, so it kind of puts me off in a book, if you know what I mean, as a potential boyfriend. So yeah, no, I couldn't get behind the whole relationship, but I did like the writing and I liked the idea of the book. Yeah, so I gave it a 3.75. The Horse Dancer by Jojo Moyes. Henri Lachapelle. I can't say it. Henri Lachapelle. Let's pretend I said that right. Basically, he's teaching his granddaughter Sarah how to, I think it's called dressage, how to make horses dance, essentially. He was very skilled at it, particularly in his youth, but even now. And basically, she has to be taken in by someone else because he can't look after her now. That is how she meets Natasha. Natasha has her own problems. She's got an ex-husband who basically won't go, and that's the start of the story. It focuses a lot on the horse and Sarah's kind of relationship to the horse and dressage, if that's what it's called. I actually liked it more than I thought I would, I'll be perfectly honest. I gave it a 3.5. Jojo Moyes, shocking. The Peacock Emporium. Susanna Peacock wants to open up a shop, emporium. Susanna's mother had a bit of a legacy that she was a bit of a wild child, and Susanna's trying to escape from the public's perception of her. There is more to the story. There's definitely trigger warnings within the book from toxic relationships. This was not for me. It started off really strong, and I really liked her name's Athene, who is the mother of Susanna. And then it focuses on Susanna, who I wasn't that interested in her story. I gave it a 2.5. Okay, so I think the next ones I'm going to have to bring down. Okay, so the next one is Melissa Explains It All by Melissa Joan Hart. If you don't know who Melissa is, she's an actress. Sabrina the Teenage Witch is where I love her from. Sabrina is one of my comfort TV shows that I watch all the time. It does mention parts about Sabrina and Clarissa Explains It All, which is obviously where the title is from. Didn't know much about her life. This focuses on, you know, even her childhood, where she was basically a young child actress. That was really interesting. She obviously goes into parts about Sabrina and when she was there, and some secrets that you may not know about her life, who she's married to, etc. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was really interesting, especially because obviously I'm a fan of her work, let's say. So the next book is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This, I think, is the first Ali Hazel book I've read. I know a lot of other booktubers really like her writing, so I was quite interested what I would think of this, because this is about vampires and werewolves, I was a huge Twilight fan. So yeah, vampires and werewolves, I can be a big fan of. This was more, I'd say, focused on the politics side, and there were parts I was a bit bored with, essentially. There are also spicy scenes, and I think quite a few other people have mentioned there were some spicy scenes that I didn't need to know about. Let's word it like that. But basically, Misery is one of the High Councilman's daughters, and she's going to be married off to the head of the werewolf pack. So she's going to be married off to Lo as kind of like to keep their alliance stronger. But yeah, like I said, this is actually a lot more politicky than I thought it would be. There's also like a bit of a mystery that Misery wants to find out. I expected a bit more, if I'm perfectly honest. I still gave it 3.75 stars, but it wasn't my favourite. Another Jojo Moyes, Ship of Brides. So the year is 1946, and essentially there's a ship. They're taking the brides who got married to the men within the war to the husband. So it's from Australia to England, and it's about the wives' lives on this ship whilst they're going over. I didn't think it sounded that interesting from the description, and I probably haven't worded it very well as I've described it. But it actually, although it took me a while to get into it, by the end of it I was actually really enjoying reading it. I gave it a 4.25 stars, and it's one of my favourites of JoJo's that I've read. And I've read most of her books now. So the next one was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas. I bought it because I've seen all the 5-star reviews that everyone else, all the booktubers have given it. This is about Farah, who shoots a wolf who turns out to be a fae in disguise. She gets taken by the High Lord fae back to their world as punishment, essentially. And it's then obviously her life in this world. Bearing in mind all the reviews, I expected to like it more. And I'm not a fae type of person, or I'm definitely not up to this point. I did like it, and I can understand why other people like it. I still gave it a 4.5, but I kind of felt like maybe I was missing something with the story. There was also what I consider to be a problematic scene in regards to their relationship as well. I won't go into it because obviously I don't want to spoil it, but I read it and thought, not sure about that. So the next book I read was We Were Friends by Jane Green. It was kind of like a short novella. It focuses on, I think her name's Lucy, and she's recently divorced, feeling a bit lonely, and she meets this girl, Elle, I think her name is, and they become fast friends. But then, is everything quite what it seems? Short story, didn't quite 100% grab me. I did enjoy it. I liked the writing. Yeah, I've read other things I prefer from Jane's more. I rated it a 3.5. So the next book I read was Exception to the Rule by Christina Lauren. It's, again, another short novella. What happens is, due to accidentally sending an email to the wrong person, a girl and a boy start having a conversation, and usually around Valentine's Day. Literally the first half of the book is only told in emails, which I really liked the idea of, and then the next half is, more a book style. I really enjoyed it, and I gave it a 4.2 star. Bearing in mind it's only a novella, I really enjoyed reading it. Another Jojo Moyes, Shelter in Rain. Basically, this is about Joy, who meets her husband at an expat's party of some kind in Hong Kong. They very quickly marry, and then it's kind of like focuses on her daughter and her daughter's daughter, so it's like the 3 different generations. I wasn't interested in this book, I'll be perfectly honest. It was probably one of my least favourites, I think. So I gave it a 2 star. Jojo Moyes. Night Music. Isabel Delancey is a skilled musician. She's a violinist. Her whole world changes when her husband dies, and she has to move to like this crumbling old manor that's been inherited. The people in the town, not all of them are happy to see her, basically. That's the idea of the book. There were definitely parts of it I found really interesting, and then there's other parts I was a bit bored at certain points. But I did like the book overall. and I gave it a 3.25 stars. Summer at Shell Cottage by Lucy Diamond. It's essentially about a holiday home and where the Tarrant family go for the summer, I guess. And there's different characters. For example, the mother whose husband has just died, and it's kind of like the fallout after that with the children and their children, essentially, and the different storylines of their lives. There is what I would consider perhaps a trigger warning in this book. There's also a big shock. It's not as sunny as you think this book might be just by looking at it. But I actually really enjoyed reading it, and I liked the characters. The characters were great, especially Freya, who is a doctor, and her issues. I gave it a 3.25.
This seems like a good place to wrap up the video for now. Please see part 2 for the rest of the 110 books I read in 5 months.